Hello there. Welcome to our inaugural episode of the St. John's of Northampton Bicentennial Podcast Series. This is a new series to celebrate the 200th anniversary of St. John's as a church, but also to just really celebrate this community and help to share the stories that are here that sometimes don't get told, to get a glimpse into what we're all co-creating here. And I'm so happy. Well, first of all, I'm Christine Eck. I'm a member, longtime member of St. John's, and I have the privilege of sitting here today with Anna Woofenden, our rector. Anna has been here for a little over 4 years. Previously, she started the Garden Church in Los Angeles. We really feel so blessed that you have come into this community. And it's been such a privilege to see the evolution of St. John's over the 18 years that I've watched it and been a part of it. And there's some really special things happening right now. And this feels kind of potent, the energy that we're living in this time and how the church is responding to that. And so I'm really grateful, Anna, for your sitting down to have this conversation. And, I know you, but I don't know all the things. And I'm excited to learn about some of your whys and some of what's guided you. So I thought we could begin with what was it that called you to pursue a path of priesthood in the Episcopal Church?
Hmm. Thank you, Christine. Well, first, it's an honor to be on this podcast, and I'm so grateful to you and your team for gathering these stories. And I too feel like there's um, the spirit is stirring at St. John's in some particular ways right now, and I'm looking forward to hearing how how she'll teach us even through this story gathering process about who we are and where we are and where we've been and where we're going. So, thank you for making this podcast happen. Yeah, so I like to say I became an Episcopalian in my heart about, I guess we're looking at like 16 years ago now when I was in seminary. I was in seminary and on the ordination track and was eventually ordained in the Swedenborgian Church of North America, which is to say kind of cousins with the Congregationalists with some mysticism and other pieces woven in. Is the tradition of my um, origin, both of my sides of my family, um, and my journey to ordained ministry is a probably a longer conversation than we have time for today. But I'll just say that by the time I was in seminary, I had really wrestled with call and wrestled particularly having come out of a branch of the tradition that where I was not able to be ordained as a female, as a woman. So my call was a hard one, long wrestle. And so by the time I arrived in seminary, I was ready to take that next step and grateful to have the opportunity to have moved into a denomination where that was supported. Um, and my world was really opened up in terms of the different denominational possibilities out there. But I stayed faithful to that tradition of my heritage, which I'm grateful for. And but as my final year of seminary, I did my field education at an Episcopal church in San Francisco, St. Gregory Episcopal, and St. Gregory of Nyssa Episcopal Church. And I was drawn to that church because they have really, it's a church plant. They're coming up on almost 50 years, so it's been a church start for a while. But I went into seminary knowing that I had a call to church planting, to starting a new community. So I was really interested to see what that looked like generations later. And then I was also very moved by their work that they were doing around feeding. They had a food pantry, which was feeding hundreds of families a week, and they hosted the food pantry in the rotunda of the sanctuary. So it was around the altar table. And um, So during my time there, that was very formative to then the Garden Church, the church that I started in Los Angeles. But it was also really formed in Episcopal liturgy and in the way that the liturgy shapes us. And you know, I say here all the time, liturgy, work of the people together for the common good. And that particular definition is actually from the Reverend Paul Fromberg, who is the rector at St. Gregory's and one of my mentors. And I think he and also Sarah Miles, who was one of my mentors there, um, taught me liturgy from the ground up in a way that has always, ever since, really benefited me in working my way into the Episcopal Church. Because at St. Gregory's, they are always asking a lot of questions. It's not a, it's a liturgy that you walk in and you're like, is this Episcopal? Because there's a lot of movement, and there's some dancing, and there's a little participation, and as I learned that, oh, it's deeply rooted in the prayer book. It's deeply rooted in these rhythms of liturgy, and it's keeping asking the question, how do we keep this alive? How is this faithful to this moment, to this context? So that's really where my journey with the Episcopal Church started. It was a decade later before I made it official, and as I said, I was ordained, Swedenborgian Church, planted a church in Los Angeles, served at a UCC church, in a Church of Christ church, and then at a Lutheran church, and then made my way officially into the Episcopal Church, and was ordained transitional deacon while I was in the interview process for here, and then ordained a priest, as you may remember, at the same service where I had my installation here. So really grateful to St. John's for being the place where I officially landed as an Episcopal priest.
Me too. I love hearing that because, you know, being in church with you, I can see how those influences have manifested in the way you hold space for our services. And everything from like creating the sanctuary as a gathering space for beyond ceremony. It's like the time where, like, it's like our living room. We're all held there. Like we all, the table is for everyone, truly. It's not this thing that's separate from us that we get permission to go up to, you know, once, each week. It becomes the welcoming kind of center for all of us. And I also, yeah, like I said at the beginning, there's a quality of like enlivenment. I love that you have experience in multiple different denominations of Christianity, because I did not grow up in the Episcopal Church, and I feel like a lot of people sometimes think like, oh, in order to go to this denomination of church, like you have to like, I don't know, like there's a
Mm,
process of like becoming that. And I've never really fully understood any of the differences truly anyway. For me, I think what is important is the feeling that I get there. And does that feeling include belongingness and safety and being seen and being invited to experience the divine together in community? But there's also this quality that you have helped create that I can see now comes from these influences, as well as what is in your heart to bring. But it's that it's like an aliveness. It's like this
mm,
energetic that is not putting us as like a witness to the ceremony or to the service. It's like we're all invited to be a part of it. And that's different than like
mhm.
most of the experiences of church that I have had. Um, yeah, very beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that. I'm curious about, if you think back to, what led you up to following this calling, like, was there a pivotal moment or moments in your life that really formed your faith, and also this door window opening to following into the priesthood? Like, is there a moment
Mm.
or moments that you can remember?
Yeah. It's interesting because when you go through both seminary and ordination processes, so both of my experiences with ordination in two different denominations, you're asked this question a lot. And I always am kind of like, okay, like like I don't mean which version as in like difference, but like it's like what length of like what how are we gonna tell this story today? Um I think that so part of my own childhood spiritual formation was we were relatively involved in a small Swedenborgian church when I was quite young. Um, but it was a couple hours away. It was kind of really an all day adventure. And I have very distinct positive memories of, probably before age 6, of, you know, getting help to light the candles. I mean, cookies and coffee hour, like getting that sugar you weren't allowed at home, right? um, and some really positive experiences with the minister, with the pastor. Really, I have this very distinct memory of asking some deep 4-year-old question and him actually picking me up and like looking me in the eye, like taking the question seriously. Um, and so I think there's some foundation there. For various reasons, my family stopped attending regularly. There's some longer stories, but I really felt a void of that regular connection with spiritual community. And when I was in middle school, I was invited by a friend to their youth group, and I spent my time in middle school and high school in an evangelical church, which I um, have a lot of gratitude for what I learned about belonging. And I mean, in retrospect, the belonging was conditional in ways that were not helpful. But I also did learn about being part of something. And throughout that process, I, because of my family religion of origin, I never found kind of true belonging there. And I, in fact, felt like I had to hide a part of myself because they were quite fundamentalist. I mean, they were actually trying to get me to be rebaptized because I had been, in their words, sprinkled as a child, rather than fully immersed, and that was not a true baptism. And there was a lot of pressure, um, which gratefully, with some support from the some Swedenborgian clergy, I was encouraged to look at confirmation rather than be rebaptized. And I'm just grateful I'm on a longer path. But I would say it was a very formative and mixed experience in my middle school and high school years of both seeing what church could be and also seeing um, how othering could happen. And so when I left for college and I went to a Swedenborgian college, it was very freeing and exciting to be able to be with people and to be fully open about my own spiritual journey. But that's where I started to really chafe against the gender um, exclusion, particularly around ordination and women's roles in church. And so there was a freedom in one sense and a belonging, and then there was I think that it really it's not somewhat in high school, but in college is definitely where my call started to get clear. Like, you know, I was doing all the things you do, right? Like I was up early leading the Bible study, and I was the chaplain assistant, and I mean, I was taking I was religion major, and I was, eating all of this up, working at the outreach office, and really interested in church planting, like starting new communities. And so that led to about a 12-year journey with that denomination. I worked for that denomination. I worked on staff, both in the denominational offices, and then spent 8 years at a church in Boulder, Colorado. And so I would say that it was some of the best formation I could have asked for, and also um, it affirmed my call in that I was doing a lot of the things that you do if as a clergy person, but I wasn't ordained, and so there were a lot of things I couldn't do. And so like what I could say is like that taking that job in Colorado was my dream job, and it became less and less my dream job as my call got clearer. So starting in,
Mhm.
it was very fulfilling because I was doing all these things. But then as my call got clearer, and I can't preach. Oh, I can't do the sacraments. Oh, there's parts of pastoral care I can do, parts I can't. It became the as the call became clear, the fit was the struggle. So much longer story short, there's a lot of pain in leaving denomination, and particularly that congregation, which I, have a lot of deep love and respect and care for to this day, and also the call to ordained ministry, particularly, um, was strong. And I think that um, had there been a different path and different things available, I am curious. I think the call would have still been there and been there. I'm curious. Would I have known it as clearly and strongly without having to wrestle for it? I don't know. That's not for me to know. But I definitely, while there was, certainly some pain and things that needed to be worked through, I also think that you know going through the fire, refiner's fire does kind of clarify something. So by the time I went to seminary, I, I wasn't wondering about the call. I was like, okay, we've been doing this for the last 12 years. Like I know what this call is. We're finally stepping into that. And I would say it's kind of felt like that ever since. And coming into the Episcopal Church has been just felt very led. I felt like I really arrived at home in many ways. And I think part of that, and this speaks to what you were saying earlier about coming from different denominational backgrounds, is that I've really found in the Episcopal Church that I didn't have to leave my prior formation and theology behind. It was more like, yes, we've got a big, there's a big umbrella, there's a big space here. What we're bound together is by our prayers, not by the particular theologian we follow. And so there was space to fully show up as myself here and fully embody that space as an Episcopal priest, which part of that is to be open and welcoming and say, yeah, we're a we're like a messy, varied crew, right? And that's a beautiful thing. That's a good thing and a beautiful thing. And we don't all think the same, and we haven't all been informed the same. But what brings us together is this desire to love God and love neighbor in community. And so, and I think that's kind of been my driving to the call is how to figure out what does it mean to be faithful in this generation. Church planting is a lot about that. Like, what does it
Mm,
mean to be faithful, to be a church, to love God, love neighbor in this time, in this place? And those are the same questions that we ask in this almost 200-year-old church, right? It's it's the same wondering and the same paying attention to how and where are we being called to show up and be the church together. Um, that was that was a long answer, or that was a medium long answer.
I love it because I feel like what you shared is that reminder that there's going to be these pivotal points in our life where we're growing beyond the structure that has been holding us, and that is going to require a change that is scary, that's going to maybe have feelings of, you know, some fear or uncertainty or regret, and it's going to take some courage to like really allow for those moments of growth and transition to happen for us. And I think what I see as I've listened to you is, when we honor that that growth has to take place and we allow for the space in which to do it, what we find is that we're provided with exactly what it is that we need. And it doesn't mean that, what has come before is gone, like it's still woven in as a part of us. And um, but what we receive is so much more. Um, yeah, and I think really provides a lot of surprise gifts that we might never have known. Yeah, and I feel that so much of why I think people gather and are coming more and more to gather at St. John's is it's not about the specifics or the traditions. It's about how it's this very universal, like the essence of sort of Christ, of this love that is hard even to describe. It's just this feeling that we have that this is a place that I can come as I am and experience that love. And to me, that's just beyond any kind of scripture or doctrine or denomination or label. It's the essence of where we all come from and where we're all trying to connect back to. And I really appreciate that. And that's, when Justin and I were trying to find a place, it was a feeling. It was just a feeling like, okay, this feels right. Neither of us had, any knowledge. I feel like I'm still like a Episcopal kindergartner, and then I don't really know all the things that are happening, but I come because it feels it feels aligned. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful piece too. I mean, I think a gift that many denominations have in all of our ways and our own sort of unique charisms. I think it's a gift of of the Christian tradition, and we see it's particularly in the Episcopal Church around our prayers and our rhythms and movements of liturgy. Is that it connects us to one another and it connects us to this like long lineage. And I mean, I just there so many times, particularly at the table, when I can feel the like, the 200 years of faithful people that have worshiped in this particular space as this particular community, and that while we are attentive to what does it mean to be faithful now, and that may mean some things shifting and changing, we're also walking in these traditions, and that we don't, I mean, you said it so well, we don't throw out what was before in order to do the new. We reimagine and we live into and we enliven, and some things we let go of that were not serving us, and other things get carried forward. And I know, especially actually around the church planting community, there's this I don't know, there's sometimes at least a perception of, oh, you're doing all new things. And for many of us, um it's like, no, in fact, if you're starting something from scratch, you are you really need to lean into these ancient rhythms and these ways of being in community together that are tried and true and have been worn and shaped over time. Because the whole point in my mind of spiritual community is that it's not one person making something up, right? It's a collective. It's something we do together. So I think it's just really beautiful to see here at St. John's that what can sometimes be a tension, um, and what I am often seen as a very alive um, place of exploration, where we are saying, what does it look like to continue to be the faithful people in this time? What does it look like to be followers of Christ in this time? What does it look like to be Episcopalians? What does it look like to be St. John's Episcopal Church in Northampton, Massachusetts in 2025, and with the world as it is, with the traditions that we are bringing forward? And that is a very alive um, playground or crossroads or art studio, like whatever metaphor you want to use, to be able to explore together. And um, I've been just so impressed, and maybe we'll talk about some more specifics, but with this congregation's willingness to do some exploration and willingness to say, oh yeah, we can change. I think that was a really pivotal moment about 2 years in, when we had a process here, and a couple people voiced like, oh, we learned that we could change. And that was a moment where I was like, okay, I can be a rector. Like, because it's a question mark, right? Some congregations don't. And I don't have, there's no, I get it. I get it. Change is hard. This is not an easy um era to be church and to be church together. So I have a lot of appreciation and respect for this community's willingness to try things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, and we learn together, and we can uh, ask the hard questions, and help each other understand, like, why did we have that reaction to whatever that was, and get deeper in that. And there's something very, I think, deep and generative and faithful. I think feels very faithful about that. That to be faithful to our tradition is to be asking these questions, to be trying things, to be changing and to be changed. And it gives me a lot of hope that we are in that.
Yeah, well, I think the intention behind the changes has always been very clear that it's in an effort to find a more accessible way to feel church together. That has been very clear that any change has been to amplify the ability for people to really be a part of it. And so, change when it doesn't have an intention that aligns for people with what creates that accessibility or helps them to have a better experience, like those changes, you know uh, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But these changes have worked, whether it's the way that we're oriented when we're sitting, whether it's changes and additions to the service, like they have all served a very specific purpose for who we are right now and what the needs are. And that it's really beautiful to see how thoughtful, how incredibly potent those changes have been and effective in helping people to have the experience we want all of us to have. Like, I know you want to have, you know, as great of an experience in your role as we all want to have when we come through those doors. So I appreciate that. And speaking of St. John specifically, and I love kind of looking at community as this opportunity to discover within unique, there's this, every community is so unique with different people and gifts and spaces. And it's like your role is sort of holding this beautiful place of spiritual leadership in St. John's. I think, you're able to sort of gather people and invite participation and sort of, I think what's beautiful is there's this broadening of your role to be held by many. So it's sort of a
Mhm.
co-creation versus, your vision, which all of us are receiving. It's
Mhm.
really a beautiful organic process. And I guess what I'm curious about is, what have you discovered since coming to St. John's about what's possible in
Mm.
creating church together?
Yeah. Ooh. Um, well, it's interesting because I think that, I shared earlier that some of my drive to pursue ordained ministry was around church planting. Like that feels like that's always been connected to the call to ordained ministry. And my first, church was a church plant, which, I mean, I should say my first church as an ordained clergy person. I was, involved as a lay person in other um, church jobs, but that that church planting kind of orientation is something that I brought here, and I think it seems at first kind of counterintuitive. This church is almost 200 years old. Clearly, not a church plant, right? But I think especially after COVID, though not only uniquely COVID, I think every church, regardless of how long it has been around, has had this invitation um, and this invitation to be reimagining and to be wondering what does it mean to be church here and now. And so um, I've just been very curious when I can step back a little bit to see how what happens when you ask these church planting questions. You know, what does it mean to be faithful in this generation? What is our context? How does our liturgy, our praying shape our believing and our action? How does organizational structure shape us? How does physical space shape us? I mean, these are all, who's in our neighborhood? What are the needs in our neighborhood? Who's not coming through the door? I mean, these are all like church planting questions, right? So to come here to this established congregation and start to ask these questions has been such a fascinating and life-giving journey, because I think what we have found is that in some ways it's more complicated because there are already established patterns and values and ways of doing things and being. And in other ways, it's easier because you're not starting completely from scratch. There's like payroll set up, or there is there's a staff, or so that very dynamic interplay between that which was here and has been here, and what happens when you start to ask church planty questions and to be willing to say, okay, let's try this. And I think it's one of I think honestly, I think it's hard to say gift out of such a trying time, but maybe one of the opportunities that came out of COVID is that kind of gave this opportunity for a reset for this, for many organizations and churches, because there was a season where we weren't doing it the way we'd always done it. And so there's this a little muscle that got built there, and you could kind of run back and atrophy that muscle, where we could say, let's keep working that muscle. And I think that's what we were able to do here, is to keep working that muscle of, well, what about, or have we thought about, or let's try. And I think it's probably important for the sake of posterity for this project to share about summer of 2023, 3. I think it's 3, but maybe it's 2. I don't know what year it is. But a summer a few years ago, when we went on this first summer of exploration, and we were exploring some of these church planting questions. We said, if our praying shapes our believing and our action, so if we believe that liturgy is the work of the people, and our praying shapes us, we really just had 2 questions. One was, how does our space shape us? And the second was, how does the ways that we participate shape us? And I think what the congregation remembers is that we moved the pews, right, from a straight line into the round. But to your point of the intention, that's the external memory. But the deeper work that was happening there, as we were looking at how does our space shape us as we do this liturgy work together, and how does the way we participate. And I think and we did some really specific things that summer around participation. You may remember, we didn't have, say, readers or greeters scheduled. You'd walk in and you'd pick up a card and, oh, you're the reader today, and some things. And some of those things we've said that was fine for the summer, and we schedule lectors again. But I think what shifted was this value and cultural norm, which was we actually all participate in the liturgy. And you brought that up earlier, that we're not just there as observers, that whether you're the priest there presiding over the table, or the person who's holding the chalice, or the person who brought cookies, or the person who's sitting in the pew and singing, or small children ringing the bells, whatever your role or roles are equally important as full participants in this thing that we're doing together, this work for the common good. And moving into the round helped to shape us to remember that. So we moved from there being only important people up front, and I say important in quotes, which air quotes don't work on podcasts. So, and having saying that we're all in this together, moving from you just see the people who are doing the particular roles. Instead, now we see all of us. We see the body of Christ in the bread. We see the body of Christ in each other's eyes. And so that physical shift and change was an outward manifestation of an inward grace, if you will. This is a definition of sacrament. It's this outward manifestation of this deeper work that we're doing together, that we are all in this together, that this is not about a performance. It's not about perfection. It's about our participation together. It's about being present together. And I think those are the deeper values and the deeper Christ following that has really continued to shape us and to be manifest in a variety of ways. And that we keep touching back to. I think that's the other thing, is that that none of this work is not done, right? So we're always asking, where is God showing up in this? What do you notice? What might need to shift? I mean, every week at staff meetings, a good portion of the staff meeting is going to say, what did you notice on Sunday? And that can be a celebration, that can be a tweak, that can be and then being willing to try something and then say, what did we notice? And sometimes that's a small conversation, sometimes that's a whole congregation-wide conversation, but that we're in that continual learning and growing together. And that we don't plan to have some arrival date where we figured it all out. This is the way to do church. But instead of doing church is this continual process of action and reflection and collaborative work together.
I love that. You mentioned a little earlier, asking that one of the questions of church planting is, who are our neighbors and who are we serving? And I am curious about, now that you've been here for a few years in this community of Northampton and beyond, like what feels like how are we called to serve in this community, and where is our role to help support our larger community?
Yeah. It's such a live question, and I think sometimes can be an overwhelming question. I think there's so much need. And I think the most maybe visible or the most present need, I think we see mostly actually throughout the week when we see people coming to Nana Community Kitchen and to the drop-in center, which is in our lowest level, where people are coming for showers, coming for laundry. The health clinic is here 4 days a week, and even in this calendar year, since this current presidential administration has been in office and all the changes that have been made, I mean, this the need that was overwhelming coming out of COVID has is doubling and tripling. There are 250 people a day coming through this space for food, for showers, for medical care, for people to care about them and to be so that is a huge a huge need, and a lot of people who have a variety of needs. And in hosting Mana as an organization and as in our continued work to strive to be in collaboration, there are a lot of ways that we are part of that and instrumental to that work. And the thing that is just continues to amaze me about St. John's is that is just one of the many ways that this community is reaching out and is being present. And I think that I think about like the weekend nutrition program, getting food to children in now 4 schools in the Northampton schools for the weekend. I think about our racial justice committee, who's been doing a lot with shrinking the racial wealth gap and doing education and um, I think about there's a lot of people who care deeply about environmental justice, and that has shown up in some education and study, particularly about what does it mean to be people of faith. But it also shows up in choices we've made in this building and in the rectory in terms of, when the furnace was going to go out a couple years ago at the rectory, the vestry voted to put in what is more expensive at the output, but will be will be cost savings over time, but also is environmentally more responsible into putting in a heat pump instead of another gas furnace. I mean, there's these kind of choices that are made around values we see showing up. And so I know I've just rattled off like a bunch of existing programs, I guess. So I think there's a multiplicity of needs that are being met to some level. But the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is the biggest need that I am seeing in our bigger community is a little bit more intangible. And I think it is to be part of a community that is rooted in something bigger than ourselves and that is working together to nurture and create the world that we're all longing for. And that intangible need is, I believe, why people are showing up at church and showing up to be part of this work. And I think it's a need that or I should say that I am trying to really bring into focus and to discover how do we meet that need more precisely or articulate it in a way that people are finding connection and belonging. So, so an example of how we're meeting that is we've started these In It Together groups so that everyone is in a group. They're meeting every month. There's community that's being built. And we're got this grant for interreligious organizing to try to connect that I want to be part of something that's grounded in faith. And I want to be, out there doing advocacy and working. How do we bring those together? So that to me is the more it's not as practical on the outset, but I think that it leads to some deeper systemic change. My hope and my prayer is that if we can meet this need of people wanting to come together in community that's focused on something bigger than oneself to create the world that we all are longing for, then that means we're going to have to be, yes, meeting direct needs in our community of people who are hungry and need shelter, but we're also going to have to be asking these deeper questions of why are there people who are hungry and need shelter? Why are there children that don't have food over the weekends? Why is there a racial wealth gap, right? So I think that's some of my curiosity and hope is that as we're paying attention to that, we can be doing these deeper layers of work together.
It's really beautiful to see all the different ways that, it's not just happening inside the building. It's happening in all different ways, reaching out. And, from my perspective, I've learned a lot about like what the church is actively doing over the last couple of years. But from, a bit more of a parishioner perspective, what I think is really potent and what is really needed is a moment of peace in the week and people need that moment, that invitation to get quiet and to receive that feeling of love and belonging and peace and healing. And when the church started offering the healing prayer, I saw and I personally experienced such an incredible gift of like direct download of that peace when
Mhm.
people get the opportunity to have someone touch them in a healing way on their head or on their shoulder and just be given direct love from me to you, whoever is saying that prayer. Um, there's really needed transmission of you matter, you care, you are loved.
Yeah.
And I it's really potent and it's very
Yeah.
moving. And all the different things we do to organize and activate initiatives and understand the needs and the problems better so that we can show up better. There's something that is so simple and direct of just being
Mhm.
able to experience that one moment um, of incredible peace. And it's
Mhm.
overwhelming. It's, emotionally overwhelming for a lot of
Mhm.
people. But I see so many people come back because they can't experience that in any other way, any other place.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful that that happens here. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, I'm just ultimately, it feels incredible to witness and also to be a part of the ways that this community is coming on things that are hard in this world with just tremendous love and openness and faith. And um, so I just want to thank you so much for your presence here. And is there anything else that you feel called to share?
Mm. Oh, I'm so glad you brought up the healing because I think that I often, my prayer going into liturgy on a Sunday morning is that, kind of in religious language, like you talk about like the foretaste of heaven, there's like this that people might experience, even if it's just for a moment or two, or maybe for an hour and a half, but experience what the world can be like when we are belong to one another and belong to God and are living in kindness and being healed. And so I think that to not underestimate, as you just so beautifully shared, the power of these sacramental acts that we do together, that, the anointing with oil, the sharing of the bread and the cup, the, um, confessing what is separating us and then sharing peace, that these are not things we do just because, oh, you're supposed to do them. These are actually deep, powerful sacramental acts that change us and shape us individually and collectively, and that matters. And so maybe it's a place to end, that I'm very moved and honored to be in a moment in time with a community that we are collectively aware that it matters and that people are showing up. I you know I'm sure maybe some of our kids might have a different opinion about this, what I'm about to say, sometimes, some days, but it seems like for the most part, and even our kids that this is true for, people want to be at church, right? They're not coming because, oh, I have to go to church. Again, grumpy teenagers or whatever aside. Um, but people are coming because there's something here that is beyond any one of us, that is healing us and filling us um, and binding us together. So it's really it's a um, it's such a difficult time in our country and our world, and it is such a powerful honor to be wondering with this community about what is God doing with us and through us, and how can we be part of that healing and that restorative justice and that radical welcome that we believe is what God is wanting here on earth, more of here on earth, and is what I think many of us at least are longing for in the bigger world. So I'm glad to be on the journey. I'm glad that we get to all do this together, and there's such a incredible team of people who the Holy Spirit keeps bringing the people that we need to be able to keep showing up to it. And I just look forward to seeing what God does with St. John's in its next couple hundred years, and what this greater body of people, how this will look to keep showing up and being faithful in this community.
Thank you so much, Anna. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Christine.